The SNP's Westminster leader Ian Blackford will join the meeting via video link from his constituency in the Highlands. He joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Laura.
You've called on the Prime Minister to ensure that any lifting of the coronavirus lockdown is done with the support of the devolved nations. And the First Minister has made it completely clear that restrictions here will remain in place for at least the next 3 weeks. So I'm wondering what Boris Johnson can say to you to try and convince you that any easing of restrictions on Monday would be a good idea.
Well, I think first and foremost what the Prime Minister needs to do is to work with all the devolved administrations here in Scotland, but in Wales and in Northern Ireland as well. It should be about a consensus that we can build with the four nations working together, and that, Laura, should be based on the medical and scientific advice. And of course, I think it is important that in addition to that, that the Prime Minister is working with the opposition parties in Parliament in Westminster. Now, we know the Prime Minister is going to make this announcement on Sunday. None of us, whether it's the First Minister, other First Ministers in other jurisdictions or opposition party leaders, know what he's going to say. But I think it's important that we do all seek to work together. This is an absolute crisis that we're in, and it's about life and death. And at the end of the day, as I've said, as the First Minister has said, that this shouldn't be about politics. This should be about the scientific and the medical advice and the responsibility that political leaders have to protect the population. We've faced a challenging situation over the course of the last few weeks and months, indeed here for me in the Isle of Skye over the course of the last few days with the outbreak that we've had here. And anything that we do must be done on the basis of making sure that we don't get ourselves into a situation that we're facing a second spike on this. It's life which is important, and that's why there's a desire, a need, and I believe a willingness for all of us to work together. But it has to be on the basis that we work together.
That on working together, that the devolved nations should have the final say on when we ease restrictions?
It's not about having the final say, Laura. It's about us being able to look at the scientific and the medical data that we have. And I have to say, as I speak to you this morning, that neither the First Minister or myself know what the Prime Minister is proposing. And of course,
we're getting a fairly clear idea from some of the London-based newspapers. The front page of the Daily Telegraph says they're going to be eased on Monday.
Well, you know, that's I think it's an important issue that you raised there, because we've got used to the last few weeks of briefing to the papers ahead of discussions with other political leaders. We've seen that in particular over the course of the Sundays. And I suppose, and I'm not carping, that when the fact that the Prime Minister is making the statement on Sunday, the Speaker of the House of Commons has already suggested, let me put it that way, that the Prime Minister ought to be making these statements in front of Parliament. That's the way that our democracy normally works. But the thing that I'm stressing is, in a situation such as this, when life is at stake, as it has been, it really is important that we do things in the correct manner. And I'm extending that hand of friendship to the Prime Minister, that all of us want to work with him, but he has to show respect to the devolved administrations. Now, we don't want to have a situation where different parts of the United Kingdom are doing things in different times, but the responsibility that the First Minister has is to make sure that we're looking after the interests of the people of Scotland. And, you know, one of the things which is important in this, Laura, we know that the infection rate, the R rate in Scotland, is now slightly above that of the rest of the United Kingdom. And first and foremost, the public would expect the First Minister and the rest of us to take actions that look after the interests of the people that live here.
Do you get a sense that in having this meeting with the opposition leaders that the Prime Minister is trying to do politics a little differently?
Well, let's wait and see. It's a wee while since we've had conversations with the Prime Minister. We've certainly had conversations with Dominic Raab when he was standing in. I'm not sure that the effect of these discussions actually led us anywhere. I think it's important that the opposition leaders do show their own responsibility in the things that we're saying. And I want to commend, actually, the other opposition parties, because we are, to a great extent, working together. And we will have our own discussions this morning before we meet with the Prime Minister. All of us recognise the gravity of the situation.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that discussion just before you move on, because you've written to the opposition leaders asking them to support you in asking for a transition extension, the Brexit transition extension, to be extended for another 2 years. Is that some sort of bargaining chip that you can use with the Prime Minister?
I think there are a number of things which concern us, and the fact that we face an enormous economic shock because of what we've had to do over the course of the spring and summer period, means that there's an additional cost that all of us would face if there's a no-deal Brexit at the end of the year. Now, nobody's saying that the Prime Minister shouldn't deliver what he believes he's been elected to do, but what we are saying is that business can't take a second hit, and the sensible thing to do is for all of us to concentrate on the crisis that we face at the moment, and let's park these discussions on Brexit, on the future relationship, till we get through this. I think that's a sensible thing to do. But it's not just that, Laura. I mean, there's the health aspects that I hope that we can all work together on, but there is the issue of making sure that nobody's left behind, and there are deficiencies in the funding that goes to companies and goes to individuals that we've raised over the course of the last few weeks. The fact that not everybody's included in the retention programme, the fact that not all self-employed workers are covered, and a lot of us, I think there is a kind of broad consensus amongst most of the opposition parties that we should be looking at a universal basic income scheme to make sure that everybody's protected. So I think there are a lot of areas where the opposition agree, and I think it's important that we play a constructive role with the Prime Minister in standing up for all our constituents as we enter into those discussions.
I just wonder if there's a danger now, though, that there will be so much mixed messaging, talking about an ease of lockdown down south, but retaining and trying to retain those restrictions up here. We had Ross Greer tweeting yesterday about people. John Beattie was tweeting pictures of people sitting in the Botanic Gardens in Glasgow yesterday, and Ross Greer was tweeting that mental health was real health and it was okay that people should be out.
Well, look, at the end of the day, we are still facing an enormous death toll from this virus, and everything that we do should be based on the scientific and the medical advice that we have. I mentioned at the top of this that we're facing an outbreak in Skye. We're at the early stages of that. I mean, it's devastating to see what is happening here, and I don't want that being visited on any other community. First and foremost, what we should be concentrating on are the health considerations for the public as a consequence of where we are today, and the absolute desire to drive down the impact of this virus, the spread of this virus, and everything that we do must be based upon that first and foremost.
Should there be some leeway for people then?
No, I think we've got to give very clear guidance, and I think the First Minister's been doing that in her daily briefings. This, all of us have an interest in making sure that we can get through this as safely as possible, that we limit the impact that this has. But if we do allow an earlier removal of the restrictions, all that we're going to do is run the risk that we have that second spike. And actually the impact, not just on the health of individuals, but on the economy, will actually be greater. There has to be discipline and appreciation from the population as to why we're doing what we're doing.
Is there discipline within your party? Mary Black retweeted Ross Greer's tweet saying that people should be allowed out as long as they observe social distancing. So there might be differences within your own party depending on age and where you're based.
No, I think the party, the government in Edinburgh has been pretty united, and certainly my colleague and dear friend is certainly united in the messages that we've been delivering, so there's no issue as far as that's concerned.
Well, the other issue I just wanted to have a chat with you about this morning, at Prime Minister's questions yesterday, you criticised the Scottish Secretary for making political arguments about the Constitution and opportunistic politicking, and yet on the front page of The National this morning we see that your Justice and Home Affairs spokesman Joanna Cherry has called for the SNP to spend the time of coronavirus lockdown building a radical case to deliver independence.
I think first and foremost, when it comes to the government in Edinburgh, and what we are trying to do is to make sure that we act in a responsible manner to get through this crisis. I absolutely take the point that as we come through this, that we need to make sure that we're engaging with the public and the way ahead on a number of fronts. How do we deliver a fairer society? How do we make sure that the workers that are on the front line are adequately rewarded for what they're doing? I mean, these questions will need to be put, but it's a question of the timing of those, Laura. But first and foremost,
politicking.
Well, first and foremost, what I would say to people today is let's concentrate on the challenges that are in front of us. Let's make sure that we're looking after the health of the population. Of course, out of this, we need to make sure that there is a roadmap for the way ahead for all of us. But the challenge today, tomorrow,
so will you be having a chat then with your colleagues in the SNP at Westminster, so to say to them that actually this is not the time to start looking for radical changes and radical moves for the independence movement?
I have conversations with my colleagues on a daily basis. I have a weekly group meeting with my group. I had one yesterday, and what I can tell you is we're absolutely focused on what we're doing today. We had John Swinney, the Deputy First Minister, with us yesterday. All the discussions that we're focusing on are what's going on today, how we can assist the government in what we're doing, how we make sure that we protect people, how we save lives. That's the things that we're focusing on, that my parliamentary party are focusing on.
Ian Blackford, Westminster Leader of the SNP, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. BBC Radio Scotland did ask for a representative of the UK Government to see if they were available for this morning's programme. We were told that there was no one available.